The Celestial Institute of Advanced Sciences occupied a moon-sized station orbiting a neutron star, which told you everything you needed to know about the kind of beings who studied there. This was not a place for the faint of heart, weak of mind, or structurally unsound of body. The Institute prided itself on educating the galaxy's finest minds, drawing from 247 member species of the Cooperative Coalition. Each species had earned its place through centuries of scientific contribution, diplomatic excellence, and most importantly, the ability to coexist in pressurized habitats without accidentally killing anyone. Then humans applied for membership, and the admissions committee spent 6 months in therapy. The problem wasn't that humans were stupid. Intelligence tests showed they were adequately clever, possessing that peculiar gift for pattern recognition and creative problem-solving that occasionally produced genuine brilliance. The problem was that humans came from Earth, a Class 12 Deathworld, which was a polite academic way of saying a ball of barely contained apocalypse spinning through the void. The admissions committee had reviewed the planetary data 3 times, certain there must be some mistake. Gravity that would crush most species into paste? Check. An atmosphere so corrosive it literally rusted metal? Check. Weather patterns that regularly produced kinetic events equivalent to tactical munitions? Check. Indigenous megafauna that considered humans a light snack? Check and check and check. And humans just lived there, on purpose. They called it home. After heated debates, 7 committee resignations, and 1 member's stress-induced molt, the Institute established a compromise. They would accept human students under the Progressive Species Integration Initiative, which was bureaucratic speak for, we'll let one of them in so nobody can call us xenophobic, but we're going to make everyone sign so many liability waivers that our legal department needs its own legal department. The selection process for Earth's candidate became legendary. The coalition representatives visited Earth exactly once, spent 4 hours on the surface, and returned with stress readings that required medical intervention. Their report contained one recommendation: send someone weak. So Earth, with characteristic perversity, sent Mackenzie Reeves. By human standards, Mackenzie was thoroughly average. She'd grown up on an agricultural colony where the most exciting event was the annual Harvest Festival, stood at an unremarkable 5'6", possessed no particular athletic distinctions, and had teachers who described her as pleasantly unmotivated in physical education. Her academic scores were excellent, her temperament even, and most critically, she'd never broken anyone's bones, not even accidentally. The Earth Selection Committee presented her file with pride. The Institute Admissions Board read it with mounting horror, particularly the note that mentioned she was considered one of the gentler candidates available. Mackenzie's first day at the Institute involved 14 separate safety briefings, a medical examination conducted entirely by robots, and the discovery that standard furniture was not rated for human density. Her assigned chair collapsed within seconds. The replacement chair collapsed within minutes. The third chair was constructed from materials used in hull plating and lasted almost a week before stress fractures appeared. Doors designed with motion sensors didn't register her as a life form, apparently calibrated for beings with more reasonable mass-to-volume ratios. The cafeteria required custom meal preparation because standard coalition nutrition was, at best, inadequate for her metabolic needs and, at worst, outright poisonous. She became a walking inconvenience wrapped in an apologetic smile, constantly trying to make herself smaller, gentler, less obtrusive in a space not designed for her existence. Her classmates treated her with the kind of nervous courtesy usually reserved for unexploded ordnance, except for Vexthor Pinnacle, who treated her with open contempt. Vexthor belonged to the crystalline ascendancy, a species that had evolved in low-gravity environments with minimal atmospheric pressure. They were beings of living crystal, refracting light through prismatic bodies that pulsed with bioluminescent thought patterns. Beautiful, fragile, and insufferably brilliant, the crystalline had produced more mathematical prodigies per capita than any other species in the coalition. They knew this. They reminded everyone of this, frequently. Vexisthor represented the 12th consecutive generation of his family line to achieve valedictorian status at the Institute. His great-great-great-grandmother had revolutionized quantum field theory. His uncle had solved the parsec limit paradox. His sister currently held the record for youngest tenured professor in Institute history. Vexthor carried this legacy like a badge of honor and wielded it like a weapon against anyone he deemed intellectually inferior, which was essentially everyone, but especially the human. The human who occupied a seat that could have gone to another deserving crystalline student. The human whose presence represented everything wrong with the Institute's recent diversity initiatives. The human who had the audacity to exist in his advanced courses despite coming from a species that only achieved faster-than-light travel 43 years ago, which was practically yesterday in galactic terms. He made his opinions known, often, with the kind of cutting precision that his species had perfected over millennia of academic superiority. One wonders, he'd mentioned loudly during their first shared lecture, what practical purpose is served by allowing primitive species into theoretical courses? Perhaps a remedial program would be more appropriate.
Somewhere they could learn basic concepts without dragging down the discourse for actual scholars. Mackenzie had said nothing, which Vexthor interpreted as validation of his assessment rather than what it actually was, the careful silence of someone who'd been briefed extensively on not causing interstellar incidents. The situation festered over weeks. Vexthor's comments grew sharper. Mackenzie's silence grew heavier. Other students watched with the morbid fascination of spectators at a slowly unfolding disaster, unsure whether to intervene or simply ensure they weren't standing too close when something finally broke. The breaking point arrived during advanced quantum mechanics, taught by Professor Quilnax, a gaseous being who existed as a sentient cloud contained within a pressure suit. Quilnax was explaining theoretical stress tolerances in crystalline structures under extreme gravitational fields, which was ironic in retrospect given what happened next. The calculations demonstrate, Quilnax floated near the holographic display, that crystalline matrices can withstand approximately 400 newtons of force per square centimeter before structural integrity fails. This is, of course, well beyond any naturally occurring physiological application, making crystalline structures ideal for construction in high-stress environments. Vexthor's prismatic form glowed with satisfaction. His species, once again proven superior through pure physics. Question, Mackenzie's voice was quiet. Your calculation uses the standard pressure coefficient of 0.035, but that's only accurate in vacuum conditions. In atmosphere, particularly dense atmosphere, wouldn't you need to account for molecular interference? The actual tolerance would drop to around 320 newtons. The lecture hall went silent. Quilnax's gaseous form swirled uncertainly. Several students pulled up calculators. Mackenzie was correct. Vexthor's glow shifted from satisfied blue to irritated orange. A minor variable, hardly worth mentioning. Any competent student would understand the context. I'm sure, Mackenzie said carefully. I just thought precision mattered in theoretical physics. We had similar problems calculating structural loads for buildings back home. Atmospheric density makes a big difference when you're working with brittle materials. Back home, Vexthor's voice dripped with disdain. Yes, I'm certain your species' primitive construction techniques offer such valuable insights into advanced material science. Tell me, do you still use combustion for energy? How quaint. We use fusion. Mackenzie's tone remained even, but something had shifted in her posture. And yes, we still study combustion. Turns out understanding basic principles helps with advanced applications. My little brother learned this calculation in primary school. It's part of the standard safety curriculum for playground equipment.
The lecture hall's silence transformed from awkward to horrified. She'd essentially just said that crystalline structural analysis was child's play, literally. Vexthor's entire crystalline structure flashed red. Anger, in his species, was not subtle. Your brother, he said slowly, a child from your Deathworld, supposedly understands quantum material stress analysis. It's not really quantum at that level, Mackenzie said. It's just applied physics. You need to know it so the climbing frames don't collapse when kids play on them. Earth gravity is pretty unforgiving with structural failures. How fascinating, Vexthor's sarcasm could have etched glass. Perhaps then, since your species is so naturally gifted with physical understanding, you'd care to participate in a simple demonstration. We have a calibrated force meter here in the laboratory, standard equipment rated for any species. Surely you could provide a practical example of Earth's supposedly superior physical education. Professor Quilnax's gaseous form turned a pale green, which in their species indicated alarm. Vexthor, that's hardly necessary. Perhaps we should return to the lecture material. I insist. Vexthor moved toward the equipment cabinet. After all, we're scientists. We should embrace practical demonstrations, unless, of course, our human colleague is concerned she might not perform as well as her young brother. It was a trap, and everyone knew it. If Mackenzie refused, Vexthor would claim she'd been bluffing about human capabilities. If she accepted, well, that was somehow worse because nobody actually knew what would happen when a human used equipment designed for civilized species. 3 students near the back began quietly gathering their belongings. 2 others pulled up emergency protocols on their data pads. One sent what appeared to be a final message to their family. Mackenzie stood slowly, carefully, with the kind of controlled movement she'd practiced for months. Fine, she said quietly, but if something breaks, I'm apologizing in advance. How considerate. Vexthor retrieved the force meter, a cylindrical device approximately 30 centimeters long, covered in calibration markings and sensor arrays. This instrument measures applied pressure with perfect accuracy. It's constructed from carbon-compressed alloy, rated to measure forces up to 50 newtons, which is more than sufficient for any biological application. The current record, held by myself, is 45 newtons. Simply grip the handles and squeeze. The measurement will display here. He demonstrated, his crystalline appendages wrapping around the device's handles. The meter's display climbed steadily. 20 newtons, 30, 40, 45. Vexthor's form glowed with satisfaction as he released the device. Several students offered appreciative chirps and pulses of approval. Your turn, Vexthor extended the meter toward Mackenzie. Unless you've reconsidered. Professor Quilnax had given up on stopping this and was instead pulling up incident report forms. Mackenzie approached the device like it was a live explosive, which, given the circumstances, wasn't far from the truth. She'd spent months learning to modulate her strength in this low-gravity environment, constantly aware that everything around her was more fragile than wet tissue paper by Earth standards. Doors, furniture, equipment, people, everything breakable, everything delicate, everything requiring the kind of constant vigilance that left her exhausted by evening. She took the meter carefully, her fingers barely touching the handles. The device registered her grip immediately. 5 newtons, 10, 15. You can actually try, Vexthor said smugly. We're all scientists here, no need to be modest. Mackenzie squeezed, gently, or what felt gentle to her, the kind of grip she'd use on a ripe tomato back home, the kind of pressure that wouldn't hurt a child's hand. The meter's display climbed rapidly, 50 newtons, 75, 100, 200, 500, 700. The device exploded. The carbon-compressed alloy, which had been rated as indestructible for biological applications by 7 different safety certification boards, discovered that ratings were only as good as the test subjects used to establish them. The meter disintegrated in Mackenzie's hand with a sound like a gunshot, transforming instantly from precision scientific instrument into rapidly expanding cloud of high-velocity shrapnel. Time, as it often does during moments of spectacular disaster, seemed to slow down. Mackenzie, operating on reflexes honed by a childhood spent dodging Earth's casual attempts at killing her, released the exploding device and jerked backward. Her movement was so fast that 3 students later reported seeing only a blur. The fragments scattered outward in a roughly spherical pattern, each piece spinning with enough kinetic energy to qualify as a projectile weapon under coalition military regulations. Vex Thor, standing approximately 1 meter away and possessing all the defensive reflexes of a particularly confident chandelier, did not move fast enough. The fragments hit his crystalline structure with precisely calculated physics. Each impact point created stress fractures that propagated through his body at the speed of sound through silicon-based matrices. His prismatic form, which had spent the last several minutes glowing with smug superiority, suddenly resembled a windshield that had just met a brick at highway speeds. The crack started at his center mass and spiderwebbed outward in geometric patterns that would have been beautiful if they weren't so medically catastrophic. Vex Thor's bioluminescent glow flickered, shifted through several colors that didn't appear in any healthy spectrum, and then stabilized at a pulsing distress frequency that triggered every emergency alert in the building. He collapsed. Or rather, he fragmented into several large pieces that collapsed in slightly different directions, which was considerably worse. The lecture hall erupted into chaos. Professor Quilnax immediately activated the emergency medical response system, their gaseous forms swirling frantically as they broadcast distress calls across all frequencies. Students scattered in every direction, most heading for exits, some diving under furniture that definitely wouldn't protect them from anything. 2 fainted. 1 began reciting what sounded like prayers in a language nobody present understood. Another started recording everything, because apparently survival instinct took a back seat to getting footage that would break the campus network. Mackenzie stood frozen, staring at her hand like it had betrayed her, then at the scattered remains of Vex Thor, then back at her hand. Her face had gone pale, which several students noted was apparently what humans looked like before they either threw up or started crying. Possibly both. "I barely squeezed," she whispered, mostly to herself. "That was nothing. That was less than nothing. Oh God, I killed him. I killed him with less force than it takes to open a jar of pickles." The medical team arrived within 90 seconds, which was impressive given they were responding to an incident involving a human and therefore had assumed they'd need trauma equipment, hazmat protocols, and possibly last rites. They burst through the doors wearing full protective suits, carrying equipment designed for catastrophic injuries, and stopped dead when they saw the scene. Vex Thor's crystalline structure lay in 7 major fragments, each one pulsing weakly with distress signals. The medical team's leader, a being named Thrixinol from a species that resembled an ambulatory fern, assessed the situation with practiced efficiency. "Catastrophic structural failure," Thrixinol announced, already directing their team to begin containment procedures. "Multiple fracture lines, bioluminescent arrhythmia, possible consciousness fragmentation. We need a reconstruction matrix immediately. Someone contact the crystalline medical specialists, and someone get that human away from here before she touches anything else." 2 security officers who'd arrived with the medical team because protocols required security presence at any incident involving Deathworld species, approached Mackenzie with the kind of careful movements usually reserved for defusing bombs. They maintained a distance of at least 2 meters, hands held out in what they probably thought was a calming gesture. "Please step back," one of them said, their translator struggling with what sounded like a plea wrapped in official terminology. "We need to secure the area. Please move toward the exit slowly. No sudden movements." "I didn't mean to," Mackenzie's voice cracked. "I was trying to be gentle. I've been trying so hard to be gentle. Everything here is so fragile, and I've been so careful, and it was nothing." "We understand," the security officer lied because they absolutely did not understand how someone could accidentally explode industrial equipment with a casual grip. "Please just move away from the scene. We'll need a statement later, but right now, medical needs space to work. Mackenzie backed away, still staring at her hands like they were alien appendages she'd just discovered attached to her body. Other students gave her an even wider berth than usual, pressing against walls as she passed. Someone whispered something that sounded like a prayer. Another muttered calculations about kinetic force that kept arriving at numbers they clearly didn't believe. The medical team worked with impressive speed, carefully gathering each fragment of Vexthor's structure and placing them into specialized containment fields. Crystalline species required incredibly delicate medical intervention. Their consciousness existed distributed throughout their structure, which meant that each fragment theoretically contained part of Vexthor's awareness. The reconstruction would require piecing him back together with micrometer precision while maintaining bioluminescent continuity across all fragments. It was surgery that typically took a team of specialists several days to complete, and that was for minor fractures. This was catastrophic. Within 15 minutes, Vexthor's fragments were loaded onto a specialized medical transport and rushed to the Institute's Advanced Trauma Center. Within 20 minutes, news of the incident had spread across the entire campus. Within 30 minutes, it had reached the Coalition Council's Emergency Response Committee. Within an hour, Earth's diplomatic corps was fielding very pointed questions about what exactly they'd sent into space and why they'd thought that was a good idea. The security investigation began immediately because apparently, when a human breaks a fellow student into pieces, paperwork becomes everyone's top priority. Mackenzie spent 3 hours in an interview room, repeating the same information to increasingly concerned officials. Yes, she'd accepted the challenge. Yes, she'd tried to be gentle. No, she hadn't expected the device to explode. Yes, she understood that 700 newtons was apparently a lot. No, she didn't know her grip strength before this because why would anyone measure that? It was just gripping things. Everyone gripped things. The security footage told a story that somehow made everything worse. Slowed down and analyzed frame by frame, it showed Mackenzie's fingers barely tightening on the device before it catastrophically failed. Biometric sensors confirmed her heart rate had remained steady, her breathing calm, her muscle tension minimal. She'd been, by every measurable standard, relaxed. She'd casually applied more force than the device's maximum rating while barely trying. The engineering team analyzed the device's remains and filed a report that used phrases like completely unanticipated stress parameters and catastrophic failure outside established testing protocols. The Safety Certification Board that had rated the device convened an emergency meeting to discuss the fact that apparently their definition of any species had been tragically incomplete. The manufacturer issued a recall on all similar devices and began work on a new model with a rating that went to 5,000 newtons, just to be safe, probably. Vexthor's family demanded immediate expulsion of the human student, citing reckless endangerment, assault with excessive force, and destruction of extremely expensive medical crystal structures. Earth's diplomatic team pointed out that Vexthor had initiated the challenge, that Mackenzie had tried to refuse, that she'd explicitly warned something might break, and that holding humans responsible for the structural inadequacies of coalition equipment set a rather concerning precedent. The legal argument devolved into the kind of bureaucratic nightmare that kept lawyers employed for months. Meanwhile, Mackenzie was confined to her quarters under protective supervision, which was a polite way of saying house arrest for everyone's safety. She spent 2 days alone, replaying the incident endlessly, wondering how she'd managed to catastrophically fail at the one thing Earth had asked of her: don't break anything important. On the 3rd day, she received a visitor request from Vexthor. The medical team had performed miracles. Vexthor's crystalline structure had been reassembled with such precision that only the faintest fracture lines remained visible, thin silver traces across his prismatic form like decorative engravings. He existed once again as a single continuous consciousness, though the doctors warned he'd need several weeks of recovery before attempting any strenuous activities, which for crystalline species meant thinking too hard about complex mathematics. Mackenzie met him in a neutral observation room with medical staff on standby and security monitoring everything. She sat on her reinforced chair, he hovered in his low-gravity field, and for a long moment, neither spoke. "I'm sorry," Mackenzie finally said. "I know that doesn't fix anything, but I am genuinely sorry. I never wanted to hurt anyone. That's literally the thing I've been trying most not to do since I got here." Vexthor's glow pulsed in patterns she couldn't interpret. When he spoke, his voice carried none of its previous smugness. "The doctors showed me the force measurements, 700 newtons. They explained that you were, by human standards, barely applying pressure, that this would be equivalent to my species attempting to lift a dust particle." "I was trying to be gentle," Mackenzie said quietly. "That's what I've been doing every single day here. Every door I open, every object I touch, every handshake I avoid because I'm terrified of accidentally crushing someone's appendage. Do you know how exhausting it is to be constantly aware that everything
Around you is made of glass? That you're a walking disaster waiting for one moment of inattention? I read about Earth, Vexthor continued, as if she hadn't spoken, though his glow suggested he'd heard every word.
After the incident, actually read about it, not just the summary data. Your planet's gravity is 4 times what I evolved in. Your atmosphere would corrode my structure in hours. Your weather patterns regularly produce winds that would shatter me instantly. You have creatures that hunt for sport, that kill without needing to, that view you as prey. We have safety regulations, Mackenzie offered weakly. You have safety regulations for playground equipment, Vexthor said, because your children play in gravitational conditions that would crush most species. Your buildings need to withstand seismic events that would register as catastrophic disasters anywhere else. Your bodies are so dense that our standard furniture cannot support you, and you call yourself average. I am average, Mackenzie protested. Back home, I'm nothing special. I can't even run a decent marathon time. My little brother is stronger than me. Most adults could easily outperform me in any physical test. Yes, Vexthor's glow shifted to something that might have been amusement or horror or both. I comprehend that now. You're weak by your species' standards, which means you're only monumentally strong by everyone else's. The Coalition sent representatives to evaluate Earth, and they spent 4 hours on the surface before fleeing in terror. 4 hours. You live there. You call it home. It's not that bad once you're used to it, Mackenzie said, then reconsidered. Okay, maybe it is that bad, but it's what we know. We don't have a choice. We evolved there. We adapted. You adapted, Vexthor repeated slowly, to surviving on a planet that actively tries to kill everything on it. And then you develop civilization, technology, space travel, all while fighting gravity that would immobilize most species. Do you understand how that sounds to someone like me, someone whose greatest physical challenge is avoiding rapid pressure changes? Sounds like we're very different species with very different evolutionary backgrounds, Mackenzie said carefully, which is why I should never have agreed to your challenge. I knew it was a bad idea. I knew something would break. I told you something would break. You did, Vexthor acknowledged. I didn't listen. I was arrogant. I believed my species' superiority was absolute, that our intellectual achievements meant we were inherently better. I saw you as primitive, lesser, undeserving of your place here. I challenged you to prove my assumptions correct. Instead, I proved them explosively incorrect and put you in surgery for 3 days. Technically, 2.5 days, Vexthor corrected, then his glow flickered with what might have been humor. But yes, you shattered my assumptions along with my crystalline matrix quite thoroughly. The doctors say the fracture patterns were geometrically fascinating. I'm glad my catastrophic failure of peaceful coexistence was at least educational. They sat in silence again, but this time it felt less hostile and more contemplative. Finally, Vexthor spoke again. I'm not going to support my family's petition for your expulsion. In fact, I'm going to publicly state that the incident was entirely my fault, which it was. I initiated the challenge. I ignored warnings. I allowed arrogance to override common sense. You don't have to do that, Mackenzie said. I'm the one who broke you into 7 pieces. 8, actually. One fragment was quite small. And yes, I do have to, because if I don't, I learn nothing from this experience except that consequences can be avoided through family influence. My species prides itself on intellectual honesty. It would be rather hypocritical to abandon that principle when it becomes personally inconvenient. Thank you, Mackenzie said softly. That means a lot. Don't thank me yet. Vexthor's glow shifted to something more serious. I'm also going to use my family's influence for something else. The Institute needs better protocols for Deathworld species. Better equipment ratings, better safety parameters, better education for students who've never encountered anything more dangerous than a stiff breeze. You shouldn't have to spend every moment terrified of accidentally destroying everything around you. That's a significant project. Yes, well, I have several weeks of medical leave with nothing to do except light reading. Reforming institutional safety standards sounds intellectually stimulating. Besides, his glow flickered again, definitely humor this time. I now have personal motivation to ensure other students don't make my mistakes. Consider it enlightened self-interest. I'm still sorry I broke you. I'm sorry I made you break me. Although, between us, the medical reconstruction did fix a small imperfection in my left crystal lattice that had bothered me for years. So perhaps it wasn't entirely negative. Mackenzie laughed, surprised the sound could emerge after 3 days of guilt and isolation. You're finding a silver lining in being shattered by a human who was trying to be gentle? My species believes in extracting educational value from all experiences, even catastrophically painful ones. Though I'll admit, this particular lesson was more literally painful than I'd prefer. The observation room's door chimed, indicating their scheduled time was ending. Vexthor rotated in his gravity field, preparing to leave, then paused. One more thing, he said. When you mentioned your brother learning structural calculations in primary school, was that actually true? Yeah, Mackenzie nodded. Basic physics is part of safety education. Kids need to understand weight distribution, force tolerance, that kind of thing. Prevents accidents on climbing equipment. Climbing equipment,
Vexthor repeated faintly. Your children climb structures for recreation. Well, yeah, it's fun. Helps develop coordination and confidence. In 4 times the gravity I can survive in. I guess. We don't really think about it that way. Vexthor's glow cycled through several colors before settling on resigned amusement. Of course you don't. Why would you? It's simply your normal childhood experience. Just as being shattered by handshake equivalent force is now mine. I believe this is what your species calls perspective. He floated toward the exit, then looked back one final time. Welcome to the Institute, Mackenzie Reeves. Try not to break anything else important. Some of us are still structurally recovering. The door closed behind him, leaving Mackenzie alone with her thoughts and the growing realization that maybe, possibly, things might actually work out. 3 months later, the Institute implemented comprehensive safety reforms for Deathworld species integration. Equipment ratings were revised to include human-safe specifications, which required testing at force levels previously considered unnecessary for biological applications. Educational programs were developed to help students understand the vast physical differences between species. Furniture designs were updated, door sensors recalibrated, safety protocols expanded. Vexthor chaired the reform committee personally, citing his unique perspective as someone who'd literally been broken by inadequate safety standards. His family, initially mortified by the incident, gradually came to view his work as another academic achievement in their illustrious lineage.
After all, reforming institutional policy across a 247-species coalition required considerable intellectual effort and diplomatic skill. Mackenzie completed her degree with honors, never quite escaping her reputation as the human who'd shattered a crystalline with casual grip strength, but finding that reputation shifted from terrifying to respected. She still moved carefully, still checked equipment ratings obsessively, still apologized when standard furniture collapsed under her, but she stopped apologizing for existing. Other students, educated by the new programs, began to understand that human aggression was simply human normal calibrated for a world that played rough, that their strength wasn't violent, just proportional to their environment, that beneath the scary Deathworld adaptations were people trying their best to fit in, be gentle, and not accidentally break their classmates into geometrically fascinating fracture patterns. Vexthor and Mackenzie became, if not exactly friends, then colleagues who shared an understanding born of one spectacular mutual disaster. They occasionally collaborated on research projects, with Vexthor handling theoretical calculations and Mackenzie managing anything requiring physical manipulation of equipment, which she could now do with equipment, actually rated for her species. The galaxy learned, slowly and sometimes painfully, that humans weren't monsters. They were simply beings adapted to monstrous conditions who'd somehow maintained enough gentleness to feel guilty about accidentally breaking things, which, philosophically speaking, suggested that maybe true strength wasn't about how hard you could squeeze, but about how carefully you chose not to. Though the Institute's engineering department still used the shattered force meter as a teaching example, mounted in a display case with a plaque reading, "Rated for any species. Specifications subject to revision. Handle humans with appropriately rated equipment." Vexithor had insisted on that last line. He said it combined scientific accuracy with practical wisdom, which was the best anyone could hope for when dealing with species who considered 4 times your survivable gravity a pleasant afternoon. Mackenzie agreed, though she suggested they might want to add, "And maybe don't challenge them to demonstrations when you don't actually know what they're capable of." The plaque committee considered it, decided it was too specific, then added it anyway after Vexthor pointed out that specificity might prevent future students from making his exact mistake. The galaxy's most prestigious academic institution thus memorialized the day they learned an important lesson. In a universe of countless species adapted to countless environments, normal is a matter of perspective, and sometimes the gentlest squeeze from one species is enough to shatter another's world. Or in this case, shatter another species into 8 geometrically fascinating pieces, requiring 2.5 days of reconstructive surgery.